Hey guys, so these are a few fights from last season, but there are enough interesting ones in here that I figured they were better late than never. This first one against Tigra, I see her here a fair amount just because, she starts unblockable, she backs people up, and then when she finally gets those specials, she causes trouble for a lot of people at the corner. But what you'll see that I'm doing here is that she can actually be step backed, or sidestepped as some people call it, which really allows you to control these fights right from the beginning without having to wait out that unblockable. From there, you do need to be comfortable with her special evades, but that's kind of true regardless of where you run into her. Anyway, throw in my special to back her up even more. Even without keeping this at high temperature, she's going down pretty quick. Hope that's helpful for anybody who runs into Tigra there. This next fight, we have Immortal Hulk on Masochism, wherein whenever people place him, it seems they try and put him somewhere where it's going to take a little bit longer to kill him, and therefore you're more likely to mess up, right? Um, so I'm using Killmonger, even though we're not going to be relying on a lot of bleeds, and we are going to be giving him a fair bit of healing from Masochism. But due to class advantage, due to the fact that my Killmonger is a rank 3, even though he's low Sig, and just due to the fact that Killmonger's a tank and a beast, this fight's pretty easy. You can see that even though we've triggered Masochism a few times and we're about to again, I mean, we have this down 20% in that first 30 seconds. We're not going to have any issue here. Now, one thing that can be cause for concern against this particular opponent, given that he is, I think, large, not extra large on this one, but you can trigger Protect, as you just saw me do right there. A lot of the champions that don't place as many debuffs are ones that do big hits and thus trigger Protect. But, as I've discussed before, Killmonger can get around that because when you activate his counterpunch, that counts as an intercept, and you can turn that protection right back off and keep going. And sometimes it's just fun to do anyway. I also like to use those counterpunches with parries, because that minimizes block damage and allows me to trigger reverb. But sometimes the parry, even though you should be able to react immediately, is just a hair slower than if you're just blocking and you're ready to attack as they run in. And that's why those previous two did not remove protection. So see here, I just regular blocked, took the full amount of damage, and used the counterpunch to intercept, and got rid of the protections, unlike before when it didn't quite work out that way. So, like Phoenix, Immortal Hulk has that thing where when he finally heals at the end of his phase, he also goes like passively unstoppable, and all of your attacks against him whiff, which is super fun. I don't like that mechanic, but that's why you saw me back off there. I think it's safer to just completely avoid him for the duration of that, and then finish him off when you're done. You see me there, I'm looking ahead at the rest of my path because I really don't want to move to the wrong one. But once I'm sure that I am not about to move to the wrong place, I go ahead and take this. I've taken this particular Sasquatch with Torch on this fight at least a dozen times now. I've died exactly once, of course, against our friends at 4 Loki, because I forgot to use the pre-fight. Or no, sorry, I used the pre-fight and it failed, and it was late at night, and I just missed that it hadn't took. I didn't back out the way you're supposed to. You do not need an invulnerability boost, as you're about to see, but sometimes it's nice to have that safety net, right? The more I've taken this fight, the easier and safer it's felt. But your basics are, you're playing the way that Torch often plays against Mystics, which is just parry, medium, light, medium. And there I shortened and didn't use the last medium because I was trying to bait him out. But when that failed, the reason I hadn't used a special beforehand is to make sure that I had one ready as the encroaching stun timer came around. Torch can usually get away with throwing his specials into opponents' blocks and does gain smolders when he does so he's fairly safe for this, but I prefer to intercept or step back with those specials as a way of controlling the opponent, or as a way to make sure I actually hit the opponent, even though I can maybe get away with not doing that. So there I had my special 2, I was ready to throw it, I just backed off out of habit because I knew the encroaching stun timer was coming up. I was ready to play through that Wrath of Tanorak cycle, but he killed himself with the Power Sting and we're good. So Spider-Ham, when I first started taking him with Killmonger, I admit I had some trouble with him. That heavy can be a little bit annoying if you don't perfectly have the timing down. It also takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable with the idea that although he has that very dangerous evade, it will not trigger until he has enough spider nonsense. So in that time, you can get set up pretty safely and make sure you have your true strike. Now, one thing that Spider-Ham does that's extremely annoying no matter where you face him is that he's often pretty slow to throw his specials. He's being pretty nice here, but one thing that I've changed about how I face him in other nodes or against stronger ones is that while I still have the true strike up, I make a point to hit into his block to try and bait out those special ones. Just remember that you can safely do that as long as you have the true strike, and he's a lot simpler. So next we have Dragon Man. As usual, you do eventually want to turn on his power gain, but since I can't stun here, the way I'm going to do it is by intentionally blocking part of the special 1. Now, that does have other effects because he's Dragon Man, but it is very worth it to turn off that power gain because otherwise he will cause some problems. I do expect to be in the corner for most of this fight, though, so it is a good idea to be comfortable evading that special 1 in the corner. As long as you can do that a couple times, Torch shuts this down without much issue. So next up, we have a MODOK on 55. I've already shared the polka dot power MODOK with Killmonger, and I've already shared a boss kill with him. You can find those elsewhere in my channel if you're curious. I think that this is probably easier, or harder than the boss, but easier than polka dot power. Because you do have ready access to those L1s, even if you might eventually take some brute force damage during the setup. Case in point, right? But the thing to remember is, even though this is a limber node, and even though Killmonger cannot benefit from the White Magneto pre-fight, or at least not the passive stun part of it, it does take a few parries for your stuns to stop working. So you have a few at the beginning. It's important to think about budgeting those out such that you get set up properly. Because now that I'm set up, I have the true strike, I have my counterpunch for those clean openings, I'm not worried anymore. The fight is essentially over. See that one? See, again, I parried and I didn't get the protection off, but I back off, and that time I just block, eating slightly more damage for the price of removing his protection. Ideally, don't get hit like I just did, but as we've discussed before, Killmonger is a tank. He can take a few hits in most fights without a problem. You can build to your special 3 in this fight, but especially because it's limber and because it doesn't have as much health as the boss, I personally just don't think that that's worth it. It would probably make for a flashy end to this fight, but if I can get through a fight without disrupting my rhythm, I prefer to go that way. So next up are 2 fights from another war. but I'm just tagging them on at the end here because you've seen me take fights like this. I mean, this is literally the exact same Torch versus Sasquatch fight. But what I wanted to show off here was that if you do have a White Magneto pre-fight to spare, as well as Torch's own pre-fight, this is just the prettiest instance of this particular matchup that I have personally taken. If you watch this, he doesn't actually make it into Wrath of Tanarak even once, and that's without going to something crazy like 12 charges as I've run into before. We're still going to follow all of our setup rules as though he's not melting quite as quickly as he is, though, because Encroaching Stun is not a node to be trifled with. That power sting damage is just beautiful, but we go for that parry and throw that L1. If he hadn't come in for a parry, then I would have been waiting for a charge and I would have backstepped into an L1 for the same overall effect. Not fully reversing his healing, but we're clamping it way down, right? And now we have the L2. I threw that. If you're not as comfortable with Torch as I am, then I wouldn't recommend doing that because the Encroaching stun timer was coming back, and it was close enough that if that L2 hadn't killed him, and if I hadn't been super comfortable with throwing the L1 while dashing backwards, like I've shown off, then you could have been caught there waiting for an opening. But because I am comfortable in that case, and because I was quite sure that that was going to kill him, yeah, that felt safe. So like I said, it was only one cycle through the Encroaching Stun node, didn't get into Wrath of Tanarak. Here we have Aarkus again. I'm just showing this one off because one of the ways that I like to play him on most other nodes is intentionally parrying him, expecting him to shrug the parry stun, but then that will put his tenacity into cooldown, and then I safely have then I can safely land my buff immunity and turn off his power gains. That didn't work here, and I was running out of room to place debuffs otherwise. The safest way to take this fight, honestly, would be to have something like Resonate, so you're constantly inflicting a non-damaging debuff and keeping his tenacity on cooldown. That would also make it less scary to go up against a low Sig Aarkus. I actually think he's more dangerous when he's like Sig 20 than he is at Sig 200, just because he's less predictable. But we're shortening our combos, we're baiting out those L1s as much as possible, and I know that eventually I am going to get back to an L2, and I'm going to instantly get 5 charges from getting rid of 5 buffs on him. And even though my buff immunity is shrugged again, I now have 5 charges, and therefore this fight isn't dangerous anymore. I also healed back all the way to full, so even if he gets to another L2, I know that I can just block it without worrying about it. This fight is completely under control, even though this is a good placement because it turns off the tactic that I prefer to use when taking Aarkus with Claire. So good on them, but if you're comfortable with this matchup, it doesn't matter. Alright, I'll see you guys next time.